Hello, this is Marcella, and this is a brief introduction to using Excel. For those of you who have used Excel before, probably don't need to use this video. If you haven't used Excel or are not comfortable, especially with tools like a pivot table, plan to watch this video. I'm going to keep it super brief. So first things first, using an equation in Excel. So this is an Excel spreadsheet. And this is one I built specifically for this class. If we open a new workbook, you get this blank Excel spreadsheet. So we're going to work off of the one I built. So things to kind of look for is this equation bar. So this is where you can type equations into Excel. So say we want to look at equals. So to start an equation, we start with equals. So equals, so if we go 4 times 8, we know that's going to be 32, but Excel can do that math for us. We can also look at something like 4 plus 3 times 2. So Excel knows orders of operations and will first multiply 3 by 2, which is 6, and then add 4, which should give us 10. And it does. So this is the equation bar. So this is where it is a calculator. So you can type in equals and use different equations. You can also use the workbook to type in numbers. So throughout the class, we're going to be measuring things. Some common things like height and diameter. And instead of typing in each of the numbers to, say, get basal area or trees per acre, we can enter numbers in and use equations to add these two numbers together. So we select cell, so this is A7 plus A8. And so it is adding 78 plus 32. This will automatically update if we change this. Say we move this down to 68, it will automatically update. So again, we use that equation bar and select the two different cells. You can select multiple different cells. Again, this is a great way to be able to have data, especially forestry data, and input a lot of information. So we're going to use this to calculate a pay rate. So we can, again, calculate using A14 times B 14 and get a pay rate. And then instead of having to retype this equation in for each of these lines, we can just drag this equation down. So we have, it's a very simple way to do it. And so it keeps things consistent and allows you to keep the numbers together with columns. So if you see A15 is times by B15, let's say we want it to keep this number constant. So we want it to multiply it by 12, but we only input 12 once. We can change where this equation grabs from, and if we put dollar signs in front of it, that line stays consistent. So it's always multiplying by 12, even as we drag it down. So we see, even though we drag this down, we have those dollar signs, and it keeps it consistent. Another important thing that you're going to be working with is summary statistics. So summary statistics are things like average, standard deviation, minimum, and maximum. So this is a really good way to get to know your data. And again, we're going to use this equation key, and there's certain functions that are already loaded into Excel. And one of them is average. So average. So that's the number. And this little button here gives you all these great statistics. So we'll be using a few of these, but that function key lets you know, and it also gives you a little bit of information on what it is. So a count counts the number of cells in a range that contain numbers, whereas the minimum returns the smallest number. So there's all kinds of information in here on what you can do with Excel. So we're going to get the average, and we're going to select all the cells we want. Okay. And that's going to give us our average of 78. And our standard deviation that gives us a range of variability. And that's really important to understand kind of where that range is. So we have our average, and we have a really big standard deviation. Now let's look at our minimum. So often we can use these things like minimum and maximum to help check our data to see maybe we made a mistake, maybe something might be off. And we'll do the same with maximum. So again, we're just using this function key. So we're typing in equals and we're typing in a function. So average, standard deviation, minimum, and maximum. Wow, our maximum is 890. That might be a clue that we typed something in. Maybe this was supposed to be 8 and the line below it was supposed to be 9. So this is a really good way to get a feel for what your data is, because most of our other numbers are between that kind of 5 and maybe 20, where all of a sudden we have this 890, which is increasing our average to 78. So let's say we actually did want 8 and 9. So we can insert a new cell and change this to 9, and let's say that one above it is 8, and our data will automatically update. So it draws from this pool and recalculates your average. Your standard deviation looks a little more accurate. Our minimum is 3 and our maximum is 17. So again, this is just using this equation bar, and you can look at these functions. So these are the functions I use a lot, which is average, maximum, minimum, standard deviation, sum, count. But you can search for a function. So maybe, say we want to get an average. See, there's all types of averages. So arithmetic mean, So there's different functions, and that's a great tool to have. Okay, now we're going to move into pivot tables and sorting. So when we sort our data, it's really important to select everything you're sorting. So say we just select this one line and click on Arrange Data. Okay, this is great because it's saying sort warning. Do you want to expand this section? Or, and sometimes it won't always tell us, but let's say we continue with just the selection. It's just going to select that data. And all of a sudden, your information is messed up. Let's undo that. So when you're sorting data, you want to select all the data. And then you can click on Custom Sort and make sure my list does have headers. And then we can sort by, say, species, and let's say status. And there we have jack pine that are dead. We have only jack pine. We have jack pine, red pine, and white spruce are all dead, and these other ones are all alive. So this is a great way to be able to get information on your data. Another important tool to have is a pivot, or another important tool that Excel allows you to do is pivot tables. And in the Mac, it's under Data. So we can, again, create a manual pivot table. So a pivot table is wonderful. So we're selecting the information that we want. So that's up here. So what data do you want to use with? And we're just going to put this pivot table right next to our data. Sometimes it works better if you're putting on a new sheet. We're just going to put it right next to it. So we're going to click OK. And all of a sudden we have this pivot table that we can add information. So let's say we have our columns up here and our row area there. So we can put our species on the top. We can put something like status on the bottom. So again, jack pine, red pine, white spruce, whether it's dead or alive. And let's put diameter. And look, let's change this. So right now it's telling us the sums, but now we can calculate the average. So this is giving us our average diameter for jack pine, and it's breaking up first by species and whether it's dead or alive. So instead of having to maybe calculate these numbers by hand, this pivot table does it for you. So this is a really excellent way to be able to summarize data, be able to explore data in a really efficient and effective manner. So that is a pivot table. This is a brief introduction to Excel. If you are having more difficulties, come ask me, but there's also really additional great videos out there on Google to help if this is not enough. So there is a short assignment that goes along with this video. If you're comfortable with Excel, it should take you about 5 minutes. If this is something more new, this will be a really good way to get into Excel before we start our lab report. So thanks again. This is Marcella, and this was a short introduction on Excel.